What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Just got out of seeing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 in IMAX, and I'm pleased to be offering my full-throated recommendation for people to see this flick, and not to worry, I won't be going into any spoilers of any kind. I think the movie goes wide tomorrow or Wednesday, but I know a lot of people won't have time to see it until Friday or Saturday, but it's going to blow a lot of people's minds, and I'm going to say something which I don't think will be controversial as I try to remember all the movies that have come out this summer, but I think of all the big-budget blockbuster movies that have come out this summer, this is my favorite. And I know that's kind of half-hearted praise because it's been a very strange summer where a lot of these movies have seriously underperformed or just disappointed people or outright enraged fans who were expecting something different from the final product. But I feel like if you're excited for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, whether you've been a fan since the late 60s with a TV show, or you jumped on board with Brian De Palma in the 90s, or you're just a recent convert who's liked the last couple of movies directed by Christopher McQuarrie, he did Fallout and Rogue Nation, and obviously Dead Reckoning Part 1 and 2. And speaking of which, you won't have to wait long for Part 2 of this movie. It's coming June 28th next year, and I have a feeling that when all the accounts are settled and all the ticket sales have come in and all the Blu-rays have been sold and all the all the video on demand services have had their day in the sun, this will be the most successful of the Mission Impossible franchise, because this movie ends on a cliffhanger which feels like it could be teeing up the end of the franchise. I mean, Tom Cruise is not going to live forever, in spite of the fact that he still looks like he's fucking 30 when he's, I think, 60 or 61 and still doing stunts like a crazy person. But if they were to walk away, if the next movie is as satisfying as this one, I feel like they could walk away with their heads held high. But apparently, they're still talking about making more of these. Maybe Tom Cruise will just keep making these until he's completely silver and gray across the top of his head. But I feel like at some point, his arms and legs are just going to start breaking off if he tries to keep skydiving it and doing parachutes and fight scenes. Like, they need to just put him in a room with like a headset, talking to his agents and that sort of thing. And I feel like that'll be good enough if they bring in sufficient new blood over the next few movies, because what was cool about Dead Reckoning Part 1, and don't worry, I'll be very careful about spoilers, it's not afraid to change the status quo when it comes to the central cast, and it's not afraid to bring in new faces to flesh out the ranks. And Haley Atwell obviously is new to the franchise. That's not a spoiler. And Haley Atwell's addition to this franchise was just a fucking delight. I mean, I've been a huge fan of hers. I guess I first saw her in Captain America: The First Avenger. But I think my favorite thing I saw her in was in the season 2 premiere of Black Mirror. She was absolutely incredible. But she's one of those actresses I would describe as just a classic beauty. I mean, directors like Alfred Hitchcock would have melted if he'd seen her in the flesh. I mean, as I was watching her in certain scenes, there's this one long sequence which you can see in the trailer where she's handcuffed to Tom Cruise for this lengthy car chase. And because of the way they're handcuffed, he's having to drive one-armed, like, with her help. And so they're basically like, all tangled up and on top of each other. And there's something about, like, her hair being all over them and all tangled up. I was like, this is the sexiest stuff that I've seen on the screen all year. And this movie has no sex whatsoever. No kissing, no heavy petting, none of that. But it has got sex appeal like no other movie that I've seen this year, because it has not one, not two, not three, but 4 of the most beautiful actresses alive today. And they're all playing cool characters. I mean, you got Rebecca Ferguson, you got Vanessa Kirby, and you got Pom Klementieff. I'm always a little iffy on the pronunciation of her last name. And I won't say who's playing what, but you have like assassins and thieves and international criminals and sharpshooters, and they're all totally badass, totally lethal. But like when you compare them to kind of the old school team, like Simon Pegg, he's getting a little leathery these days. But Ving Rhames, he's been in this team or on this team since 1996 with the Brian De Palma film. And for whatever reason, Ving Rhames is not like ageless in a state of perpetual youth like Tom Cruise. I really would love to know what Tom Cruise's secret is in terms of diet, exercise, sleep, drinking blood, whatever the case might be. But whatever he's doing, it's fucking working. And it's just incredible to me that at this point, Tom Cruise has been not only a movie star for 40 years, but a massive movie star for 40 years. I don't think there's another actor alive with the longevity of Tom Cruise in terms of hits, going back to the early 80s, movies like Risky Business, or in the mid-80s, movies like Top Gun. I mean, from that point onward, he's had his peaks and valleys, ups and downs, and he's even had periods where I really kind of loathed and detested him, thought he was just a fucking weirdo. But what I really respect and admire these days about him, and who knows, maybe it's all fake, but at least his public persona, he seems to have a genuine, earnest desire to want to just thrill the audience as much as humanly possible. And he'll do crazy things like when he was shooting this, he wanted to offer a thank you for the success of Top Gun Maverick, which was his most successful film. So he shot a video while skydiving talking to the fans about how it was an honor to have the opportunity to entertain the audience.
As always, thank you for allowing us to entertain you. It truly is the honor of a lifetime.
So I was like, wow, that's such a refreshing attitude. Instead of insulting the audience or berating the audience or looking down on the audience, he recognizes that without the goodwill and the interest of the audience, none of this movie magic is possible. Like it is a business of hits. And if you're making movies for hundreds of millions of dollars, well, they need shitloads of people to show up with a smile on their face and have a good time. And speaking of which, I very rarely say this, but the audience that I saw this movie with at 42nd Street and 8th Avenue here in New York at the AMC, usually that Times Square audience leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of arriving on time, staying off their phones, not talking, not making phone calls, just not making a nuisance of themselves. But I could tell the movie was working when the whole audience seemed kind of like dialed in and really like enjoying it on its wavelength and, you know, laughing at the right times, not laughing like a bunch of knuckleheads, but laughing with joy when they saw a well-executed scene. And that's something I can relate to, where you're not necessarily seeing something that's funny or like a clever line, but you can't contain your glee when you see something well done on the screen. And this movie, like the whole franchise going back to the 60s, has always dealt with deception and sleight of hand, but they really lean in on the deception and sleight of hand, where a couple times I was like, oh, whoa, like you'll be kind of sitting up in your seat and kind of squirming, like trying to like pay attention to what's going on to see if you can catch the next trick before it plays out before you. And speaking of deception, what's brilliant about this movie is how like the main antagonist of the movie, and I won't get into a lot of details, but a fundamental problem at the core of this story is like the nature of truth. What is truth? What is real in the 21st century? And what's going to happen as AI and machine learning increasingly kind of change the nature of what we accept as real, as what we accept to be true, and how like the wars of the future might be fought over information and control of information. And I feel like a franchise that's always dealt with intelligence and deception and disguises is kind of perfectly tailored for this kind of subject matter. So the movie feels eerily like prescient or very prophetic. It feels like it's got its finger right on the pulse of things that are happening right now. And I don't know if that was deliberate or by just cosmic chance, but I think it will work in this movie's favor, where it's going to have long legs for a couple of years at a minimum, where people are like, oh my God, like this movie really feels like it reflected our technological moment in which we find ourselves. But because this is a big budget action movie, of course, the first question a lot of people are going to ask is, which is better, John Wick Chapter 4 or Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1? I don't know if it's necessarily a fair comparison, because they're dealing with very different budgets and very different approaches to the action genre. Like John Wick definitely has the gnarlier action sequences, the more brutal hand-to-hand combat, the more brutal, just violent sequences with like, you know, flaming shotguns to the face and that sort of thing. This felt different. This felt very huge and slick and glamorous, in a lot of ways kind of classic and sexy. It's very fast-paced. It's very long. One of my only criticisms is that this movie is very long. I won't say you'll feel the length, but you'll be aware of the length. Let me see what the actual running time of this fucking movie is. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, 2 hours and 43 minutes. That is long. I would say it's the shortest feeling 2 hours and 43 minutes that I've ever seen. Like The Godfather, which I love, is only like 7 minutes longer, and that feels way longer. This movie just hums and hums and hums right along. It's only got a few major action sequences, but the transitions from one location to another are seamless, and it has a minimum of exposition dumps. I mean, these kinds of movies tend to overindulge in exposition dumps, but what this movie does, which is pretty clever, they turn these exposition dumps almost into like unintentional comedy, where without giving anything away, there's one scene I was like, I cannot believe how clumsy and awkward, just how ham-fisted the delivery of all this information is. But then they turn it into easily the funniest scene in the movie, where they're going into the nature of Impossible Mission Force and what they stand for and what they do and how they came about. There's a lot of stuff in here about how one joins, the choice one has to make, the pledge one has to make, and what were the driving factors for Ethan and all of his teammates, and what was the point in their lives where they really felt compelled to join this organization. And all that stuff was really cool. It finally felt like we were getting a little bit of world building. Like, these movies tend to be kind of standalone films where all you really need to know is what's contained in that movie. But I like how we're getting a little bit of background of these characters while at the same time opening the door to new characters joining the team. But I just realized I chickened out and didn't answer the question about which is better, John Wick Chapter 4 or Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. As an action movie, I think John Wick was stronger. But as a movie overall, there's something about these 4 just drop-dead gorgeous women that I will be eagerly looking forward to watching this again. Like, sexual tension, it's such a different experience from, like, sexual gratification. And this is what a lot of classic Hollywood movies had, like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when you couldn't get away with showing anything. And you just feel that unbearable tension, like where you can tell the actors are just dying to rip their clothes off and dive into bed together, but they're never going to. They're just going to kiss in a really steamy way. But anyway, a little, I guess, withholding, a little tease and denial goes a long way. But also it helps that all 4 of these actresses are playing bad motherfuckers. Like Palm Clementif, in a lot of ways, it's like a weird mix of like, how can I put this? It's like they took Harley Quinn and Boba Fett and created like the ultimate murder killer chick who just fucks people up. Who, like, she barely talks, but she just looks fucking fantastic on the screen. And I just loved every second that we got to see her in this movie. And another person worth mentioning who is the heart and soul of this franchise, even more so than Tom Cruise, and that is Lalo Schifrin. Lalo Schifrin, I mean, he's one of the all-time great movie composers and wrote the scores to movies like fucking Dirty Harry. I mean, he is a legend. He did fucking Enter the Dragon. I mean, Lalo Schifrin is a bad motherfucker, and his scores from the late 60s, early 70s are particularly good. But that bum, 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 I mean, that beat, that pulse, it just propels this movie forward. Probably why the movie feels much shorter in spite of its excessive length. So it's just incredible how Lalo Schifrin, he's been, actually, is he still alive? I don't even know. I was about to say he's been dead and gone a long time, but maybe he's not dead and gone. Let's see. IMDb, Lalo Schifrin. Let us see. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, he's alive. Holy shit. All right. Well, I hope he gets a big fat paycheck every time one of these movies come out, because he is one of the living legends of his craft. But another thing that works in this movie's favor is that it's very light in comparison to a lot of the kind of joyless, overly grim action movies we've seen in recent years. I know a lot of people got off on No Time to Die, the last Daniel Craig Bond film, but for me it was an utterly kind of mirthless, joyless experience when you compare it to the Bond films of the 60s and 70s and 80s, like the great heyday of James Bond. James Bond is supposed to be, like, it's supposed to make you feel euphoria when you watch those, and you're supposed to feel delight. And I won't go so far as to say that Dead Reckoning feels like a 70s era, like Roger Moore movie, because there's none of that winking and there's none of that hopping into bed or none of the drinking of cocktails. But it is very lighthearted, even though the villain of this film is a pretty evil, sinister bastard. They don't go all in, like showing him twisting the heads off kittens and that sort of thing. He's just cool. He's played by Esai Morales. He plays a character named Gabriel. And I think the first thing I saw him in a long time ago was, La Bamba, 1987. When I was a little kid, he played the brother of Richie Valens, and he was just incredible in that. And for a guy who was an adult back when La Bamba came out in 1987, he's remarkably well preserved as well. I'm sure he and Tom Cruise are sitting there having like clandestine meetings about the secret to perpetual youth. But he's probably not going to be anybody's like all-time favorite villain, but he's cool, he's slick, he's confident, he looks great, he's awesome. As far as villains go, also Vanessa Kirby, she's fantastic. Vanessa Kirby, while she's devastatingly beautiful, you can tell she's leaning into the character and having fun with it. Kind of how Tom Hiddleston used to with the character of Loki back in the early days around the time of the Avengers, where you could tell he's with like uttering each line with pleasure. And she does this amazing thing where she kind of squishes her eyebrows and nose together when she's speaking, where she looks like a little girl who's been caught doing something naughty, but it's absolutely delightful. And yeah, she's an incredible addition to this movie. I guess she appeared in, I think, Rogue Nation, I'm not sure, or actually no, maybe she was in Fallout, I can't remember, but anyway, she's a recurring villain, and she was a delight to see again. Now, I've already mentioned how delightful it was seeing all the various sleight of hand gags there are in this, almost like a magician, where it's like, now you see me, now you don't, but just little things. There are certain items that are being pursued in this movie, almost like the Ring of Power and friggin' Lord of the Rings, that keep changing hands, and the way people will slip it into people's pockets or behind, like, or back into their own or behind their fingers. It's all very cleverly done. And once again, no CGI, no special effects, just sleight of hand. But the stunts in this are so fucking fun. It's such a relief to see actual people doing crazy things. And of course, like when you see Tom Cruise taking that motorcycle and riding it up the cliff and jumping it off, like there is CGI there because that's a ramp he's jumping off of, but they disguised it to look like rocks in a trail. So there's still some like finessing, and I feel like that's how CGI should be used. It should be used to enhance. It's like a deal sweetener, but it shouldn't be the feature attraction. The feature attraction should be watching a crazy motherfucker like Tom Cruise, who has all the money in the world and everything to lose, doing like multiple takes of that stunt. Driving the motorcycle off the cliff, going into the skydiving, pulling the chute. Oh, we didn't get it. Let's do it again. I think he did that scene like 30 or 40 times. Like, which fucking, he's a crazy person, but we get a front row seat for all of his crazy antics. And I knew we were in for something special where before the movie started, they played like 2 or 3 behind-the-scenes featurettes where they were interviewing director Christopher McQuarrie about some of the logistics involved, like shooting a giant chase scene in Rome is complicated because the roads are cobblestone. So if you're trying to slide into a shot, well, like the cobblestones might make the car go in a completely different direction. It makes it very complicated. But as they were showing some of the stunts, I started getting chills before the movie even started. And for me, I go to see movies for that old familiar feeling where the movie just comes to life and you get just goosebumps up your neck and back. And that's when I know a movie's really working. But when I started feeling goosebumps from a stunt and a behind-the-scenes featurette, I was like, oh my God. Like, I hope I don't peak too soon, but this is going to be a special experience. And then it absolutely delivered. Now, I won't go so far as to say that Christopher McQuarrie is the best thing to happen to Tom Cruise late in his career, because I feel like he's worked a few times with several directors who have done a great job of kind of keeping him relevant as he gets older. And obviously, like Doug Liman is a good partner in crime for him, and Joseph Kosinski obviously is a good partner in crime for him. But Christopher McQuarrie, now that he's made 3 of these Mission Impossible movies, clearly he's a vital component of Tom Cruise's ongoing success. And Christopher McQuarrie's been around since The Usual Suspects. He wrote The Usual Suspects for Bryan Singer back in 1995, and it took him a little while to level up. As a director, Way of the Gun was pretty good in 2000. Then he directed Jack Reacher in 2012. Then he did Rogue Nation. Then he did Fallout in 2015 and 2018. And I think you can make a case that these last 3 Mission Impossible movies are the best of the franchise. And that's comparing his work to filmmakers like Brian De Palma, who did the first, then John Woo, then J.J. Abrams, who did the third. I think that was the weakest of the 3. Too serious, much like a lot of the other action films in the 21st century. And then Brad Bird did Ghost Protocol. But goddamn, this is nice work if you can get it. I mean, I'm sure he works damn hard. Working for Tom Cruise must be a little bit just like an out-of-body experience because he's very driven, very successful. He demands a lot of himself and he demands a lot of his crew. But goddamn, Christopher McQuarrie consistently delivers for him. Now, I only have a few nitpicky grievances, and I already mentioned the length. It is too long, which I do think will interfere with its box office because you won't get as many screenings per day. If your movie's 2 hours, well, then you can probably squeeze in 1 or 2 more screenings than you might otherwise. And I don't think it hurts the movie, but it will hurt the box office. And I think a lot of people, they look at Fandango and say, oh, 3 hours long, like with trailers and travel, or 3.5 hours. I'll wait for this to come online. I totally get that impulse. And also, this movie's got so much competition coming its way. It's got basically like a week and a half before friggin' Barbie and Oppenheimer are just going to eat it alive next week. And Barbie's selling apparently crazy tickets, or at least selling crazy tickets on the East Coast and West Coast. And Oppenheimer, I think, is going to soak up all the kind of like adult audience. But I do think that Dead Reckoning will have legs. I think it'll have very strong word of mouth. I think it'll have very modest week-by-week dips. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if by the end of August that it's the highest grossing movie this summer. Like, I think Barbie's going to open huge. I think Oppenheimer's going to open low. I think Oppenheimer will do just fine. But it wouldn't surprise me if we're talking about, hopefully, fingers crossed, billion-dollar movie worldwide for Mission Impossible by the end of the summer. But who knows? I've been wrong before. I thought The Flash was going to gross $1 billion, and I was completely, totally wrong. But as far as like one more criticism about this movie, just so you don't think I'm completely, totally bought and paid for, some of the fight scenes in this feel a little bit like actors doing dance moves as opposed to a fight. Like, there's some great close quarters combat scenes, like in tight alleyways with people with knives and pipes, and they're going after it. But there's sometimes when people are just punching and kicking, you can tell there's kind of like tapping shins or tapping wrists and that sort of thing. And, you know, I watch a lot of MMA, and sometimes you don't always throw every punch or kick, you know, with like full power. Sometimes you're just trying to touch them up and that sort of thing. But there are a few times where I was like, are these people even fighting, or they're just enjoying like going through the motions? So I won't say that the hand-to-hand combat is the best aspect. However, you get to see Rebecca Ferguson in fight scenes. You get to see Haley Atwell in fight scenes. You definitely get to see Palm Clemente in fight scenes. And Tom Cruise is in a shitload of fight scenes. So the action is excellent. But with Mission Impossible, the feature attraction is always the stunts, and the feature attraction is always the twists. It's like the surprises when somebody pulls their face off, and you're like, oh my God, like how did I not, it was so obvious in hindsight. But anyway, I did get caught off guard once or twice. So there it is. I had a ton of fun watching it. I will definitely be watching it again. I hope it does well. I'll be rooting for it. And like I said earlier, the second one is coming our way in less than a year's time on June 28th. And I imagine people will be eagerly anticipating that one. If this movie doesn't make $1 billion, then the next one certainly will, because I imagine they've, or at least hopefully, save the best for last. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If so, please leave a comment down below and hit that notification bell to be notified about future content. But I can't thank you enough for watching my video. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.